G'day YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. With a sort of a video response to the people who can't understand why anybody would care to associate the current drought that we have with human industrial scale global fossil burning and the release of greenhouse gas, because the way they put it, we've got a drought now. We had droughts 100 years ago, back when there was very little industrial scale activity on the earth. Yeah, well, you know, like in the comment thread I talked about Tyndall talking about carbon dioxide being a greenhouse gas, and that by the 1880s they'd discovered that it was in fact increasing since they first measured it in the 1850s, and they'd identified it in the 1820s, I think, as being a greenhouse gas. And in 1912, the first newspaper article in America suggested that continued burning of coal was going to be a threat to the climate. However, let's look at a far more erudite commentary than I can come up with off the top of my head. Let's have a look at the last month's New Scientist magazines. And some bloopers are so fortuitous, you just have to leave them in. Here we have 5. I plan to skim through the first 3. First, here's how goes it. Monthly average is 47 millimetres, we've had 42. If we get any more before Friday, we might actually make the monthly annual average after 31.6 millimetres over the weekend. So there's 1,500 litres in the reflecting pond. And the dewdrops are still dripping. Or more likely, as the water in the Cascade drum warms up and expands in the heat of the sun, which is a bit like sea level rise and global warming. 14 July, page 24, staring disaster in the face. I fear we've become numb to bad news about wildlife and we risk sleepwalking into mass extinction. Wake up. To my shame, I've not been minding my language. I just said to someone that we've lost 97% of our flower-rich meadows since the 1930s. During this year's Spring Watch series on BBC television, I heard myself saying we've lost 86% of the corn bunting population. On another occasion, I spoke of a loss of 97% of our hedgehogs. Lost, as though this habitat and these species have just disappeared into the ether, been misplaced or accidentally vanished. They haven't. They've been ploughed up. They are dead or they don't exist. Destroyed is the word I should have been using. So why wasn't I? My language is symptomatic of a chronic acceptance of appalling catastrophes. Repeated mention has normalised such figures. We conservationists bandy the statistics around to the extent that they have lost meaning. Welcome to the warming world. Analysis heatwave. Why are we seeing record heat across the northern hemisphere? Because the planet is getting hotter, and it's going to get a lot hotter still. Scotland hit 33.2 Celsius on 28 June, for instance, passing the previous record of 32.9 set in August 2003, though the Met Office says this new reading may actually be due to the heat from the engine of a nearby vehicle. And in Oman on the 26th of June, the temperature never dropped below 42.6 degrees Celsius, even at night. That's the highest minimum temperature ever recorded. Heat records tumbling is just what we would expect to see on a warming planet. By contrast, in an unchanging climate, there should be fewer and fewer records broken over time. But talk of a heat wave across the entire northern hemisphere is misleading, as parts are cooler than the recent average for this time of year. Also, some of the biggest recent heat anomalies are occurring in the other half of the planet. Some places in Antarctica, where it is midwinter and well below freezing, are still warmer than normal. The thing is, typical temperatures are much higher than they used to be. Global average surface temperatures have risen by more than 1 degree Celsius since pre-industrial times. That means that when it does get hot, there's a good chance that it will be hotter than ever before. As the world warms, there will be ever more severe heat waves, and yet more heat records will tumble. 21 July. Every breath you take. Air pollution is too easily ignored. A girl's death may change that. Bedford Street, the home of New Scientist's London office, is a fairly narrow road in the heart of busy Covent Garden. Every day it's clogged by cars, taxis and lorries struggling to navigate a centuries-old path designed for horse and cart, their engines idling, spewing out toxic air pollution. This scene is replicated across London and the rest of the UK, where air pollution is said to kill 40,000 people each year. Worldwide, the figure is 7 million. Those numbers are somewhat misleading. No one has, quote, air pollution on their death certificate, but all our lives are shortened from breathing pollutants like nitrogen dioxide. Despite this, tourists and office workers happily share Bedford Street with a silent killer. As with climate change, we find it almost impossible to perceive the ever-present harm being caused by government inaction on cleaning up our air. Page 16, marshes set to get that sinking feeling. Marshland in parts of the UK could start to disappear in a little over 20 years due to rapid rises in sea levels. Using sediment samples, Ian Shannon at Durham University, UK, and his colleagues have tracked sea level over the past 10,000 years to see how changes have affected salt marshes. They used the data to estimate that marshes could start to disappear in southeast England from 2040 and across all of Britain by 2100. Salt marshes are delicate ecosystems that protect coastal areas from erosion by being a buffer for storm waves. They also filter farmland runoff to help maintain coastal water quality. Page 21, will islands move to ditch fossil fuels? Help. 12 July, Ireland's Parliament voted for a bill that requires the country's €8 billion investment fund to sell off all coal, oil and gas investments over the next 5 years. The bill has to be reviewed by a financial committee, but is likely to become law soon. Norway announced in 2015 that its $5 billion fund would divest, but only from coal. That would be because the fund is generated by the sale of oil. 28 July. The state of life on Earth. Biodiversity may prove to be the defining issue of our age. Biodiversity decline is the canary in the coal mine for a broader malaise that will come back to haunt us. The mosaic-tailed rat was no more. The small rodent eked out a lonely existence on Bramble Cay. When Europeans first landed in 1845, the place was teeming with them. But frequent inundations caused by rising sea level made life increasingly precarious, and the creature is now literally a drowned rat. That's sea level rise from global warming. Page 17. Early spring plays havoc with goose migration and survival. Barnacle geese are radically changing their migration patterns as a result of the warming climate. Spring in the Arctic is starting earlier because of rising temperatures, and barnacle geese are speeding up their annual trip to reach the best breeding spots, with devastating consequences for chicks. Each year, the adults migrate 3,000 kilometres from the North Sea to breeding grounds in the Russian Arctic. They normally stop on the way to for food and rest along the Baltic Sea, but they've started skipping these rest breaks to reach the Arctic in time for its increasingly early spring. This means they arrive at their destination almost 2 weeks ahead of their usual schedule. This rapid non-stop migration came as a surprise. The early arrival has created a problem. The geese are exhausted and need time to replenish energy before laying eggs. As a result, they can fail to lay in time for the chicks to hatch when food quality is at its peak. This is making it harder for the chicks to become strong enough to survive the return journey. Page 28. Life on the brink. Biodiversity is essential for humans to prosper, which is why we need to know how we're harming it. 50% average reduction in animal population size between 1970 and 2012. 58.1% of the world's land surface has severely compromised biodiversity. Doesn't look like that anymore. 1,375 bird species threatened with extinction, 13% of the total surveyed. 5,488 mammal species threatened with extinction, 25% of the total surveyed. And still life springs eternal. We hope. 4 August. Page 16. Water everywhere, but just a drop of wilderness left. The ocean is barely wild anymore. A map of the ocean wilderness shows that only 13% of global waters remain undisturbed by human activity. 13%. Analyse the effects of human stressors on the seas, which fall into 4 broad categories: fishing, pollution, climate change and shipping. Transporting vast quantities of goods across the ocean can disturb habitats, pollute the water and move invasive species around, and pollution doesn't just include physical contaminants. Light pollution is included too because it can affect coastal habitats. Of the 16 ocean realms the team studied, the surface waters with the largest portion of wilderness left are parts of the Southern Ocean closest to Antarctica, which are 88.5% wilderness. Arctic waters are also less disrupted than other areas, although both may soon change as loss of sea ice increases, says Jones. In the temperate areas of the Atlantic between Europe and North America and between Africa and South America, wilderness is almost entirely gone, with less than 0.5% of waters undisturbed. 2/3 of all the ocean wilderness is in international waters, and of that left in coastal areas and open seas, Jones found that less than 5% is protected. Day of Reckoning. Earth Overshoot Day is a hugely popular way to highlight a global environmental impact. Here are two views on it. Charles Ponzi is unfairly blamed for the Ponzi scheme, a scam in which you rob Peter to pay Paul. It's yet another gender bias in history because fraudster Sarah Ho predated Ponzi by at least 40 years, swindling Boston ladies. Later, Bernie Madoff took the Ponzi crown. He relied on new investments to provide, quote, returns to earlier investors, taking from the future to pay for the present. In fact, even Madoff has been outdone. Our current economies are running the largest Ponzi scheme ever. We are using the Earth's future resources to power present activities. Currently, humanity consumes the planet's annual natural resources more quickly than Earth can replenish them. Debt balloons will eventually burst. Our ecological debt shows up as carbon in the atmosphere, collapsing fish stocks, shrinking forests, eroding soils, and drying up groundwater. Let me be more precise and give you the numbers. That's what ecological footprint accounting was designed for. These accounts are the most pedestrian science you can imagine. For objectivity, they use United Nations data. They build on the premise that Earth's ability to renew its resources is the most limiting material factor for the human economy. The accounts add up demands for biologically productive space given our needs for food, timber, carbon sequestration, and room for infrastructure. The sum of this demand is humanity's ecological footprint, now 20.9 billion hectares. But those surfaces of our planet that can provide for this biocapacity amount to 12.2 billion hectares. In other words, we are 9 billion hectares short. This means that humanity is currently using nature 1.7 times faster than ecosystems replenish, akin to using 1.7 Earths. This excessive demand can be turned into a date, Earth Overshoot Day. Essentially, it's the day humanity has used as much of the planet's ecosystems can handle without going into the red. In 2018, it falls on 1 August, the earliest so far. Currently, carbon emissions are 60% of our footprint. About 150 years ago, that part was negligible. If we want to live up to the Paris Agreement, the carbon footprint should be zero again before 2050. Good luck. Trouble from the deep. We've disrupted the Atlantic's churn, and that could make future weather even more extreme. Intense heat waves could be one result of a weaker conveyor belt. The Atlantic slowdown is unprecedented in the past millennium. A weaker AMOC would shift water around the Atlantic, leading to extremely rapid sea level rise along the east coast of the US, adding 15 to 20 centimetres at New York City by 2100. This would also bring on more severe flooding whenever storms hit. It also isn't certain that there would be any cooling. The effects for the rest of the world are murderous. In Central America, Africa and Southern Asia, billions of people depend on the monsoon rains. A weaker AMOC would shift them hundreds or thousands of kilometres north or south, leaving many regions parched. Collapsing the AMOC would probably be very bad news for the West African Sahel monsoon. So there's that. 11 August. Antarctica's shocked new loss. 2 huge glaciers are rapidly melting. The 2 glaciers hold enough ice to raise sea level around the planet by 5 metres. 2 glaciers show global warming is already affecting East Antarctica. Arctic danger. The Arctic is already warming at twice the rate of the rest of the planet. Now, a little-known cycle in the Pacific is entering the phase that could make it heat up even faster. The upshot is that as the warm phase kicks in, it could amplify warming in the Arctic. It's possible it will warm the Arctic even more, but we need to wait at least another 10 years or so to find out. Hothouse Earth fears. Even if we stop pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, a cascade of tipping points may result in a warming of 4 or 5 degrees Celsius, warns a group of 16 climate scientists. With that would come additional sea level rise between 10 and 60 metres. For the past 6.5 billion years, Earth has been much hotter than today, with no permanent ice at the poles. The hothouse Earth state 3 million years ago, as CO2 levels fell, it began oscillating between 2 cooler states, ice ages with great ice sheets covering much land in the northern hemisphere and interglacial periods like the present. If Will Staffen at Stockholm University in Sweden and his colleagues are right, we might be on the brink of pushing the planet out of the present interglacial state and into the hothouse Earth state. This means that even if all our greenhouse gas emissions ceased and we managed to limit warming to 2 degrees by 2100, we are currently on course for 3 or 4 degrees Celsius by then. Warming would continue over the next few centuries. The group also argues that existing models underestimate the warming by at least 0.5 of a degree Celsius because they don't include all feedbacks, such as less carbon being stored in the oceans or forest dieback. As Earth warms, more will be triggered. The team stresses it's pointing out a risk that needs studying, not something that's certain to happen. Some climate science were sceptical, others thought it was reasonable. And it seems that the Mayans fell due to a drought. Analysis of fossil water shows there was half as much rain as usual between AD 800 and 1000. And at times there was 70% less than usual. And we're missing 54.6%. I'm not as silly as I look. Ciao.